This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I cannot believe it's already the last day of the month. I know February is a shorter month, but to think we're already coming up on March, it really doesn't seem like we covered all that much wrestling so far this year, does it? Tomorrow is the Elimination Chamber, which actually makes me realize that we've literally done one PLE coverage this year for WWE. I guess the Rumble wasn't until February 1st, which is kind of weird to think about. But hey, at least The Rock is back. And in one single appearance on SmackDown the other week, he managed to instantly make the current product 1,000,000 times more interesting. People have been really cold on the WrestleMania build. And justly so. Looking at what this rumored card is shaping up to be, looks like absolute garbage. But you throw in the caveat of a possible Cody heel turn, him siding with The Rock and becoming corporate Cody. Now that is something that could potentially be attention-grabbing. And granted, it's not entirely fault-proof. You could definitely argue it's kind of a catch-22 situation no matter how they book it. Because while, yes, the idea of forcing the fans to boo Cody when there's not really an incentive for them to do so, given how over he still is right now, it's always a tough judgment call. But there's also the argument to be had that if the fans are already sick of babyface Cody in the first place, well, turning him heel is kind of a moot point. Because then the people would just cheer the heel turn because they essentially get what they wanted. Now, granted, there are still passionate Cody haters that exist. Most of them are marks that were already booing Cody when he had one foot out the door with AEW. But I could actually get behind the idea of a heel Cody as champion, working as the right-hand man for The Rock. Especially if you think tomorrow night, if Cena ends up winning the chamber match, which kind of looks like the direction they're about to go anyway, if you do Cody and Cena at WrestleMania, and then instead of having Cena just win the belt like everybody's already expecting, if Cody turns heel in that match and cheats to retain the belt, aligning with The Rock in the process and selling out to the fans, you could easily make a viable storyline where Cody goes out on television and talks about how he's doing what he believes is best for his wife and kid. And if the fans were in his shoes, they'd have done the exact same thing. They don't have to like what Cody did. Whether it's moral or ethical, that's not really what matters in the conversation. What matters is Cody did what he had to do for the betterment of his family. And there's your story bill for SummerSlam if you wanted to give Cena the big rematch and have him win the belt there. I know that's all conjecture and fantasy booking. And I normally don't like doing that kind of stuff because evidently my ideas are a whole hell of a lot better than what the company decides on. So then I just get pissed off. But we'll see what they do tomorrow night. They have options now, and that is certainly a good thing. For today, though, we're going to get back onto our classic wrestling bandwagon. And if you are new to the channel, welcome. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling channel nobody knows but everybody needs. You can find us on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new wrestling coverage. Make sure you subscribe, comment, give the show a like to show your support, and help out the small, unknown wrestling community. Lord knows we need it. What do you say we dive into our classic coverage for the week? And we are officially returning to the Saturday 6:05 shows. We've had a string of big events in the last couple weeks. We review the Clash of Champions that took place in Cleveland, Ohio. And then we also review the Chi-Town Rumble pay-per-view in Chicago the following week. So, as you would expect, a lot of this week's show dealt with the fallout to the Chi-Town pay-per-view. Shameless plug, but if you haven't already checked out the review last week, do yourself a favor and go watch that show, because you'll get my full analysis of the Chi-Town Rumble card. A pay-per-view event that I always enjoy going back to watch. Definitely one of the more considerable highlights during this period in the NWA timeline. But as we delve back into Atlanta here for some quality studio squashes here at Techwood Drive, boy, here's a match that just screams quality squash. Michael Hayes and JYD versus El Negro and Nightmare. Not the Nightmare, just Nightmare. All one word. We also had Hiro Matsuda looking on intently, as I believe JR noted at one point. Why Matsuda was out there? Still not entirely sure. But apparently, and unless I misinterpreted what they were saying on commentary, I believe Jim implied that Matsuda no longer had a working agreement with Ric Flair. So, apparently buying out his contract a few weeks ago was all for naught. Now they've just gone their separate ways. I mean, to be fair, the whole Matsuda Horseman thing was such a blimp on the radar. I highly doubt most people even remember it. Seriously, why do they even bother? You do a segment where they come out and explain that Wyndham and Flair had their contract sold to Matsuda so he could be their manager. And less than 3 weeks later, they just drop the storyline like it never happened. I mean, other than Matsuda being out there for no particular reason, there wasn't really much to say about the match. It wasn't even bad. I was just bored to tears watching it. The only thing that stood out was the fact that Hayes was utterly incapable of doing a basic hip toss without fucking it up. It was amazing. But aside from that, they wrestled for a while, and eventually Hayes got the win with a Jake Roberts DDT. Also, Dog looked like he put on about 10 pounds of fat since the last time we saw him work, which was approximately 2 weeks ago. And then we came back for Hacksaw Butch Reed versus Chris Powers. And judging by the physical state of Chris Powers when I saw him here, took a lot of balls to settle with the last name Powers. This fishy white, no muscular tone jabroni. So Reed spent a few minutes beating the piss out of him and then going over with a top rope shoulder block. At one point during the match, JR randomly decided to get a merch plug in by talking about Old Spice NWA custom gym bags, which I immediately paused the show to open another tab to see if this was actually a thing they sold. Unfortunately, was not able to locate anything resembling an NWA custom gym bag. So they must have been rare collector's items back in the day. As someone who's actually in the market for a moderately decent gym bag myself, I was kind of bummed I couldn't find anything on eBay. I did, however, manage to find a used DDP vintage duffel bag being sold for the very affordable price of $55. So, it's out there for you to peruse. All kinds of fun stuff you can find on the wacky world of the interwebs. And then we had our first of several Chi-Town Rumble replay packages throughout the show. This first one was mainly just a highlight reel of all the finishes to the title matches. And it kind of got me realizing that out of the 4 title matches on that pay-per-view, 3 of them had screwy finishes. The only one with a clean, decisive finish was the World Heavyweight title match between Flair and Steamboat. And again, this is all stuff I covered on the recap last week, so you can go listen to my coverage and hear what I had to say about the finishes to all those matches. I will at least echo the main point I was getting at. We are still in the recovery period for a lot of fans getting burnt out on the dusty finishes they were accustomed to seeing over the years. So it really didn't bode well for the company when the Chicago fans got what were basically 3 consecutive back-to-back-to-back fucky finishes for title matches. You can't even really call them dusty finishes. They were just indecisive, wonky finishes. And I do have to say, in terms of the way they formatted this taping, it was weird because they go through all that trouble of showing the finish results before actually airing any of the matches on replay. So we come back from break, and they go to show the Rick Steiner-Mike Rotunda TV title match from the pay-per-view. I'm like, we literally just saw them air the pinfall sequence not less than 2 minutes prior, and now they're going to air highlights of the actual match. Then we also backtrack to the interview they shot beforehand where the Steiners and Bob Caudle are talking in the back. The whole thing was very strange. I was confused at first because they never actually aired that interview segment on the pay-per-view. Steiner and Rotunda were already in the ring getting ready to wrestle. So I saw Rick with the belt here and I had to remind myself, oh yeah, this is taped before the match even took place. So again, I'm not going to get bogged down with recapping the whole match. I just did a full review the other week. I still maintain the opinion that this was easily the most disappointing match on the entire card. God, the disparity between watching Rotunda and Steiner at Starrcade 88 for the belt versus what we saw in February at the Chi-Town Rumble, it was like watching in an entirely other dimension. I mean, this match had almost zero heat to it. Crowd was not into Steiner like they were back in December. And overall, the match just never clicked for me. It was a painfully dull, lackluster title match with a lame finish that didn't get over. I mean, the only real notable thing about the entire segment was getting to see the debut of Scott Steiner. They actually gave him some promo time during that Rick Bob Caudle interview. I think it was the most laid-back, hush-tone version of Scotty we'd ever see during his career. And, as far as Rotunda winning the TV belt back from Rick here, pretty sure that was mainly just a setup so he could drop the belt to Sting in the not-so-distant future. So you almost had to do a title change in order to get to where they needed to go. But doing Rick Steiner and Sting in a babyface versus babyface title match, I don't think that would have worked. Because then you're just intentionally splitting the audience down the middle unnecessarily. So I had no qualms with Rotunda winning the belt back. I just thought the match was a letdown. But from there, we come back for this Magnum TA Eddie Gilbert interview. And Eddie's here to let us know that he is full of surprises in the NWA. And today, he's got another big surprise to reveal to the viewers around the nation. It is the return of none other than Missy Hyatt. His eye candy / wife. Actually, wait. Were they already divorced by this point? I know they got together and ended up getting married sometime in '87 when they were both still working for Watts in the UWF. Can't remember if they were still officially married by this point or if they had already separated legally. Well, in any case, boy, this is kind of awkward. At the same time, we're covering the Missy Hyatt John Tatum story in World Class, where Missy's promising to be Tatum's insurance policy to help him win all of his matches. So here we are in '89, where she's basically promising to do the same for Eddie. In this case, it's a little different, though, because Missy's clearly supposed to be a babyface on camera. So her role is more like standing by her man sort of thing. And that's primarily what you got across in her promo. I know before not too long, she ends up becoming the Steiners' on-screen manager. They end up doing the whole thing where her and Nancy are the girlfriends of Rick and Scott. So by that period, I think it was safe to assume that her and Eddie were no longer together. She certainly had a reputation for getting around the locker room. Can't really say you didn't see it coming. There's a reason they coined the phrase ring rats. So we go to the ring for Eddie Gilbert versus Rick Connors. By the way, not to be a heartless dirtbag, but I'm just going to call it like it is. Have you all seen recent photos of Missy Hyatt in the last several years? Whew. Telling you, man, Botox is the true enemy of female anatomy. Stay away from that shit, ladies. Never looks good no matter how they try to sell you on it on the internet. I mean, Missy's got duck lips wider than my fucking ass. And you know, while I'm on the subject of Missy, may as well just keep stewing on it, because Lord knows I have anything to say about this absolutely boring fucking match. It sucked. Nobody cared. Eddie won with a stun gun. There's a great moment from JR here where he's talking about Missy's stunning beauty. He goes, she's got the two biggest, bluest eyes you've ever seen. And you can actually hear Magnum cracking up a little bit because he knew, as did everybody else, there is no fucking way that is where everybody thought Jim was going with that comment. You knew he couldn't say it on television, but you're like, damn, we wanted to hear it. By the way, when I said that Eddie went over with a hotshot stun gun, it took him 2 attempts. Because, well, naturally, Rick Connors fucking sucked, and he had no idea how to take the move the first time. So instead of calling an audible and just pinning the guy another way, Eddie said, no, motherfucker, you are going to take this move whether you like it or not. Just making it patently clear that they screwed it up the first time. And then we go from the outhouse to the penthouse. As we approach the top of hour 2 on this week's TBS program, They methodically chose this point to stick the Ric Flair-Ricky Steamboat title match highlights into that part of the show. Unfortunately, they did not air the entire length of the match. So if you didn't order the pay-per-view and expected you were going to get the whole thing aired here in its entirety, well, you got stiffed. But for what they did show, it was hopefully enough to entice people to want to order the damn thing on replay, or at least buy the VHS when it came out. I can't believe we're going back to a period where we're still talking about VHS tapes. Most of you Gen Zers out there don't even know what the fuck those are. I'm surprised people even know what DVDs are in 2025. Technology has come a long way since. I mean, I know I keep regurgitating the same talking points. Listen to the pay-per-view recap. Listen to the pay-per-view recap. But especially when it comes to talking about Flair and Steamboat, this is absolutely one of those matches that you just need to watch for yourself to understand how truly special it was. It's about as picture-perfect title matches go. A timeless classic that you can go back and relive anytime. It still holds up. And like I talked about the other week, it's a trilogy series where when people ask which one was the best match of their 89 feud, was it the Chi-Town Rumble, the 2 out of 3 Falls match at the Clash, or the Wrestle War pay-per-view later that May? I mean, there really is no wrong answer because all those matches were unique and distinctive in their own right. I still personally love the Chi-Town Rumble match. The 2 out of 3 Falls match is more well-renowned because of the length of the match and the way it kind of showcased the cardio of both athletes. Still a great match. I'm not underselling it. And I actually haven't gone back and watched the Wrestle War match in a very long time. I think people often overlook that third match just because of the fact that it was the same night Terry Funk pile drove Flair on the announce table. And that angle was talked about more than the Steamboat Flair blow-off, unfortunately. But that's the cool thing about doing this retro review series for the NWA. Not only getting the chance to go back and watch these classic moments in context, but having the deep dive conversations about the implications of the matches, how the feuds impacted the business at the time, and how they hold up after rewatching them 30 plus years later. And by that same token, we also get to talk about things that didn't hold up 30 plus years after revisiting them. Case in point, the Iron Sheik. Oh boy, Sheiky. Where do you start with the absolute abomination that was the Iron Sheik run in WCW here in the late 80s? I'm still trying to figure out how the decision was made to even bring Sheik back around this point. How old was Sheik here? Had to have been in his late 40s, right? Probably pushing 50. And look, I get it. He was a huge draw as a heel for Crockett Promotions going back to the early 80s when you still had Jim Brunzell and Johnny Weaver and Blackjack Mulligan at the top of the card. And remember, too, at the time he had first started working in the Carolinas, who was the head booker in the Crockett territory? George Scott. So you already figured that George had a hand in making the call to bring Sheik back here in 89, thinking he was going to be able to milk the glory period from the early 80s. The problem, though, is that we're talking about an Iron Sheik who was immensely out of shape by this point, And he already had health issues and a bad reputation because of the car arrest incident in '87 with him and Hacksaw Duggan. Back when it was a crime to see babyfaces and heels interacting together in public spaces. And so Sheik shows up for this interview here with JR. First thing you immediately take note of is his massive beer gut. While he's flexing for the camera and trying to put over how amazing he looks, he's also naming all of his other accomplishments and some of the previous companies he worked for during his career, including the AWA, World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico, and the WWF. Oh, wait a second. We're not allowed to mention that company. Whoops. God bless Sheik. He's just going on and on and on for seemingly forever. The longer he goes, the more it's plainly obvious that he has no visible endpoint to his dialogue. Eventually, he just forgets what company he's working for. He interchangeably starts saying WCW, WF. But, I think the main point was him calling out Ricky Steamboat and trying to lay out a challenge of some description. Then he jumped in front of the camera and told everybody how great he looked. So, okay, I'll be upfront with you right now. I don't remember a God-blessed thing about the Iron Sheik's run in WCW over the next year. Except for one thing. I remember the whole contract drama where they basically sent him home at some point this year because his matches were so abysmal that nobody wanted to see him work. And because he had been gone for so long, whatever his contract amounted to, I think it was somewhere around $100,000, $125,000. But he'd been off of television for so long, even management forgot that he was still under contract to begin with. So they never sent him his termination papers. And instead they let his contract roll over for another year and ended up paying him another $100,000 to basically sit at home and do jack shit. I think he may have come back sometime in 1990 to work underneath matches very briefly. Then they sent him home again. I can't remember what the story is. All I remember is he basically made $200,000 on a guaranteed contract for what amounted to an extended paid vacation. So, say what you want, but you can't call the guy an idiot. He gladly took that paycheck and said, "Up yours, Turner." By the way, did I mention this company went out of business in about a decade? A little over a decade. There's a reason for that. Oh my God. You want to talk about guys not being able to work? Well, we had another big surprise return this week on the Saturday TBS program. The newest member of the Varsity Club. None other than Dangerous Danny Spivey. The soon-to-be one half of the Skyscraper pairing alongside Sid Vicious. And or The Undertaker, depending on what period of the timeline we're talking about. But yes, indeed, it is the return of Waylon Mercy. Y'all thought we were done talking about Spivey after that infamous WWF run in 1995. Oh, how you were wrong. Because we're about to get a glance at his entire WCW run from '89 through whatever year it was he left the company. Sometime in 92 or 93. By the way, for anybody asking, when in the hell did Dan Spivey become an honorary member of the Varsity Club? I had actually completely forgotten about that. I strictly remember Spivey in the NWA for the skyscraper run. I remember zero details about him being in the Varsity Club. But apparently that was a thing. I guess because he played college football at the University of Georgia. And since the Varsity Club comprised of Rotunda, Dr. Death, and Kevin Sullivan at this point, they seemed obligated to bring in a fourth member to fill out the group. Meanwhile, I'm like, and the best you could do was Dan Spivey? I mean, I like Kevin Sullivan, but dude, come on. Surely you're a better talent scouter than that. So Spivey had an absolutely abhorrent match here at the studio with Tom Pittner. And normally I'm one to solely put the blame on the job guys for dragging down the actual stars. In this case, I can't even blame Pittner for how bad this was. They could have put Spivey in there with Mike Jackson and the match still would have sucked dick. It's hard to even describe just how unathletic Dan Spivey was. Actually, Magnum put it over best on commentary, whether he realized it or not. The whole idea that Spivey came into the company and claimed that he wasn't a real pro wrestler, rather he was a big tough guy that liked to beat people up. Just hearing that comment about him not being a pro wrestler, I'm like, well, he certainly wasn't lying. That really is what it boils down to, though. I mean, yeah, the guy was ginormous, but that's all he had going for him was his height. Physically, he looked like a giant bag of vanilla pudding. No physique, no visible tan. He didn't really have a very distinctive standout quality about his ring presence, which you definitely cannot say about Sid. Sid had a ring presence in ways that Spivey could only pray to have. But he was so nondescript. And my God, everything was Spivey's ring work. It always looked like he was wrestling underwater. Like on top of him nearly fucking up every power move he tried in this match. Even his running looked like it was happening in slow motion. And like facially, there's nothing there. He'd occasionally holler some stuff into the camera, but he was so plain and generic. He eventually went over with a boss man slam. And not a particularly good one. He just sort of grabbed Tom, picked him up, and fell forward with him. Yeah, I'll put it this way. You know how there are those times where fans and even the boys just never have anything remotely constructive to say about a particular talent? I often think about guys like Ahmed Johnson, Crush, Bastion Booger, Khali. Just guys with no redeeming qualities about them whatsoever, to where even the diehards admit, yeah, this guy really was never any good. Dan Spivey is always one of those names. I've never actually heard anybody say out loud, man, I really miss the skyscrapers, or I really like Dan Spivey's work. And I'm telling you this right now, if you hear people saying shit like that out loud, please knee them in the crotch as hard as humanly possible. Because they need a wake-up call. Anybody that tells you they like Dan Spivey's ring work, They're delusional. Now, from there, we go to this Dick Murdoch interview where he basically wasted 60 seconds of airtime talking about Midsouth. God, you want to talk about extremely awkward promos. This is one of those things that just made me laugh. Dickie's out there just talking about how great the Mid-South area is. Great food, great talent, great community of people. Then he just randomly calls out Butch Reed for no discernible reason. And then the interview just kind of abruptly ends when Murdoch loses his train of thought. There's a brief moment of silence in the studio where the fans are contemplating how to even react to it. And then like 4 or 5 people just start a very calm, slow golf clap. Hey, you got 2 hours to kill. Sometimes you need those filler segments to throw in there just for shits and giggles. And then Murdoch had a very boring match with Keith Steinborn. And in fact, it was so boring, JR and Magnum at one point randomly started bringing up Dick Murdoch's haircut and the type of spring water he prefers drinking. I think they were literally just trying to stir up conversation about something. Brainbuster 1, 2, 3. That's all I have to say about it. And then, oh my God, this segment. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse. Some nincompoop, some fucking brain trust in that organization, they said to themselves, I got a brilliant idea. Let's put a microphone in front of Dan Spivey and let him cook for a few minutes. Boy, did they instantly regret that decision after this was over. Holy fucking shitballs. He certainly wasn't cooking in this promo. He set the whole goddamn stovetop on fire. I kid you not. This may in fact have been the worst promo I've ever heard. That is not even hyperbole. It was so bad, I actually had to get up and leave the room and take a walk to alleviate the pain. I almost don't even want to review it. I might vomit in my mouth. So, God, dude, even Spivey's promo sounded so phony and forced. And you listen to his delivery here, and nothing about it sounds remotely genuine. He's trying to be all crazy and tough, talking about how mean and badass the varsity club is. At one point he says, if you piss them off, they're going to send you in a limo to the hospital. Yeah, first class. Ambulances are so last year. If you're going to the hospital courtesy of the varsity club, you're riding in style, according to Dan Spivey here. Then he just outright loses his train of thought and forgets what he was supposed to say. So he has to awkwardly look at the camera with bug eyes until he can figure out where the fuck he was trying to go. And that was about the point where I just shook my head and got up to leave. Christ on a cracker. Why would you even air this? This was a taped show. They could have kept this out. This did not need to air. Fuck. By the way, did I mention how much Danny Spivey sucked? Yeah, just wanted to get that out in the open if it wasn't already clear enough. And then Kendall Windham wrestled Keith Hart. Fine squash. Kendall looked pretty good here. I did kind of laugh how they essentially killed Barry's lariat finish in the first 90 seconds. Kendall gives Keith 2 consecutive lariats off the ropes. Keith kicked out of both of them. I mean, you think about how many matches Barry won with that running lariat over the last 3 years. Kendall gives this guy 2 of them from right out of the gate. Job guy just kicks out. Excellent. He eventually gave Keith a power slam off the ropes and then finished him off with a bulldog out of the corner. Then we go to a JYD Michael Hayes interview at the booth. Now, this is certainly a thing that aired on television in 1989. So they were here to respond to Hiro Matsuda's offer from earlier in the show. You know, the offer where he literally just came out and stood in the background to watch them wrestle. So Michael Hayes, ever the verbal linguist, he basically tells Matsuda to take his artificial offer and shove it. And by that, I mean that he said something apparently so unsuited for television that the network had to bleep out a solid 5 seconds of his promo. I have no idea what he said. He may have called him a Jap. Whatever it was, they did not let that air on TV. And if that wasn't bad enough, then JYD did a blatant Japanese stereotype accent to make fun of Matsuda. And he basically said they don't need a manager. What they need is a bone to chew on. Because every Junkyard Dog promo in 1989 was him literally just saying that exact same phrase over and over again. So, hey, the promo got over in Atlanta. Can't say it would have gotten the same response in, say, New York or any other heavy metropolitan area across the country. The South was a much different place going back to the 80s and 90s. They were more tolerant to racial jokes. And boy, the hits just keep on coming with the absolutely terrible ring action this week. It's another TV debut. Or should I say newcomer to the NWA. Vincent Young versus Joe Cocaine. Or Cocaine. However it was pronounced. I certainly needed some cocaine by the time this show was over. But yes, Vincent Young, I believe, was he the adopted son of Chief Jay Strongbow? I think that's right. Oh, this poor guy. You want to talk about somebody that never stood a fucking chance. I actually have vague memories of this exact segment because this was pretty much a dead-on-arrival gimmick. And I can't remember how the story goes. I think he wrestled a couple matches on Saturday night before he actually worked on the Superstation in Atlanta. But they send this guy out there in this absolutely ridiculous patriotic getup. He's got the American flag printed on his ring pants. Like, I can't even remember what the gimmick was supposed to be. Was he a breakdancer or some kind of disco show off? The whole thing never made any sense to begin with. And boy, did it get over like a fart in church here with the studio crowd. I actually didn't think much of it beforehand. But there's like one key moment in this match where you instantly knew kiss of death. Game over. There's no chance in hell for this guy. They're out there having this absolutely hideous match. Nothing is getting over with the audience. This is already coming off Vincent fucking up a head scissors takedown and doing a bunch of wonky offense that the job guy barely knew how to feed for. Even JR was having trouble trying to give the guy compliments. I mean, he essentially said, well, the guy has plenty of moves. Now it's just a matter of figuring out how and when to execute said moves. So, pretty much everything I complain about with the modern product. Again, they're having this horrible match. And at one point, you hear one single fan in the crowd scream, and I quote, "This ain't Chippendales." And, I don't believe this man was ever fully credited for single-handedly destroying what was already a failed gimmick. But he deserves a round of applause because not only was it hilarious, but it was dead on balls accurate. For anybody that doesn't know what Chippendales is, look it up. But yeah, this is pretty much the end of Vincent Young. I don't think he lasted another month in the company after this. He actually might have retired. I remember he worked some underneath matches for the WWF before showing up here. God, he had a shorter career than fucking Dan Spivey had. And on the one hand, you obviously feel bad for the guy, but come on. Who the hell thought this is ever going to get over? Oh, wait. Dumb question. I know the answer. How silly of me. Jim Herd. We're already approaching the period where they try to get way too cute with the cartoon gimmicks. Because it worked so well for the WWF. Let's copy and paste that business model here, but do it 10 times more poorly. So yeah, this whole thing was ass. And then for the final segment of the show, this is where they re-aired bits and pieces the original Midnights versus Midnights match from the Chi-Town pay-per-view. And again, hear my full thoughts on that match. Go listen to last week's Friday podcast. It's a good six-man. Despite all the Dennis Condrey drama and then having to replace him with Jack Victory last minute because of the no-show. And granted, it doesn't signify the end of the Paulie-Jim Cornette rivalry. And that's going to continue well into the Bash Tour this summer. But it does pretty much spell the end for the Midnight versus Midnight program. Which, albeit, was kind of dead in the water after Starrcade anyway. I think that match is always going to be a case of the boys doing the best with a terribly shitty situation. That's all you can really say. Relish in the moment while you can. Because it's one of the last times you'll actually ever see the Midnight Express go over in a feud. Minus the dynamic dudes. We're about to enter the dark stages of the Midnight Express booking under the Turner regime. mainly the Jim Herd influence on the booking committees. At least Bobby and Stan got their hands raised at the end of this one. Plus Cornette. Can't say the same for their remaining feuds throughout the remainder of the year. But yeah, this show kind of sucked. Especially Hour 2. God, was Hour 2 insufferable. But again, dude, this is that new crop of young stars they were bringing into the company around this point. Trying to phase out that old guard and bringing in these newer, fresher names that were lesser known to the public eye. And for the most part, they were not names that people actually wanted to see. Like, I watched this show and red flags were going up left and right. Dan Spivey, Vincent Young, Iron Sheik. You could definitely tell this is a post-Crockett era. And it's only going to get substantially worse until Flair takes the book and tries to single-handedly turn things around. Along with some of the smarter minds that happen to be in his camp. But let's move on to Midsouth television. First thing in my notes, right out of the gate. A warning message to anybody that does LSD or any type of heavy hallucinogen. Do not attempt to watch this episode on drugs. I'm not kidding. If Boyd Pierce's outfit will send you into a tailspin. That was the most goddamn trippiest outfit I think I've ever seen from Boyd. And just so y'all don't think I'm crazy, here's a screenshot. That is a suit design that'll even make the carnies cock their heads sideways. Seriously, where do you even find stuff like that? That's all got to be custom made, right? Someone should have asked them. Anyway, man, where do we start with this week's program? Well, I guess the best place to start is to do a quick recap of what went down the other week. It's actually a good lead into the first segment. Last episode was where we learned that Magnum TA was declared the #1 contender for JYD's North American title. A decision that Mr. Wrestling 2 was not satisfied with. Mostly because the board of directors didn't get 2's input before making the final decision. And since we all know 2's a grizzled old ring vet, he believed he should have been in consideration for the title shot well before Magnum. So they're obviously teasing a lot of dissension between him and Magnum as a tag team, without overtly having them argue on camera together. In fact, Magnum has been very calm and rational about the whole thing, despite Wrestling 2 acting like a jealous prick. And boy, did that change this week. So we go to the ring for the official contract signing for the Magnum JYD title match. Or at least what began as an official contract signing, but then quickly devolved into a very messy situation. So you got JR, Grizzly Smith, and Wrestling 2 in the ring. They're also there to take part in this historic moment. This was also back during a time when contract signing segments weren't overexposed to the point of killing the entire concept. So there's that. And there is a lot to break down with what happened here. So I'm going to do my best to cover all the important details. It should be noted that the body language of Wrestling 2, that was really the whole story of the segment. I mean, it flashed off warning bells right from the jump. Everybody's talking about how big this moment is for Mid-South. Grizzly's there putting over Magnum and talking about how he's proved to the board of directors that he's earned this title shot. You had Dog and Magnum doing very standard babyface promos to one another, talking about how it's going to be a good, clean battle, may the better man win sort of thing. And finally, things start to get a little bit spicy when JR tries to get Two's input. And we already pretty much established the other week, Wrestling 2 was not pleased with the decision of Magnum getting the title shot. It was kind of expected that his mind would not change here. So very matter of fact, JR asked 2 if he's had a change of heart. Is he now okay with this title decision? To which Wrestling 2 just point blank looks at Jim and goes, no. Hey, Wrestling 2 is a very blunt man. And then it turns into a very hostile situation where 2's going off on the Dog, poking fun at his shit-eating grin, saying he's sitting there smiling from ear to ear right now because he knows that Magnum is easy pickings. Whereas if Dog wrestled somebody who was actually worthy of the challenge, a Nikolai Volkov, a Hacksaw Butch Reed, a Crusher Darso, what have you, if Dog was actually beaten by any of those men, he'd be crying about the situation and complaining that he got screwed out of the belt. And this is where you start to see everybody get out of their chairs and, well, if this were 2025, tables would have been flipping over in the next 30 seconds. But everyone remains marginally cordial while Dog is ripping into Wrestling 2, basically telling him, look, dude, I ain't afraid of nobody. And if you're so bent out of shape over the whole situation, maybe I ought to go down to Tampa and meet with the Midsouth board myself, just to get this whole thing overturned. That way we can squash our beef and I can give Magnum his fair opportunity. And again, things are really starting to get out of control by this point. And JR is trying to be the mediator and get Wrestling 2 to talk about training Magnum and giving him the platform to become the man he is today. Which in turn basically amounts to 2 explaining that Magnum is who he is today strictly because of Wrestling 2. Without his instruction, he'd be a walking bum with no future and no promise. And this is where shit gets good. All those weeks where Magnum's in the background just letting his mentor verbally admonish and demean him, finally Magnum has the goal to stand up for himself. And in the single greatest moment of Magnum's career since the tar and feather angle with the Midnights about a month back, Magnum looks Wrestling 2 straight in the eyes and tells him, yes, you've made me into the man I am today, and I owe you everything for that. But at the same time, if I didn't already have something inside of me to begin with, you would have never had anything to work with. And right now, I don't think you're thinking very clearly. In fact, you're doing a good job making a real ass of yourself. And the moment Magnum dropped that line about Wrestling 2 acting like an ass, he gets slapped across the face as hard as humanly possible. And my God, dude, the pop for when Magnum called out Wrestling 2 on his bullshit, people went ballistic for that. And it was the highlight of the entire show. Magnum calling Wrestling 2 an ass. I loved it. And then, of course, you got Wrestling 2 going off on Magnum, giving him a verbal tongue lashing about the fact that Magnum's showing him zero loyalty, and he already knows where the Dog stands in the whole situation. So as far as he's concerned, he's done with this whole thing. So Wrestling 2 goes to leave. And as we think cooler heads are about to prevail, we get a little interesting plot twist. Because Dog tries to put over Magnum and tell him that he doesn't need to take that kind of crap. He can be his own man and stand up for what he believes in. To which Magnum basically says, this whole thing is not worth the hassle. Now, the only reason Wrestling 2 walked away this time was that Magnum had too much respect for him to fight back. but to him it's not worth it. So he grabs the contract from Grizzly and rips it in half. So it would seem that the title match is not going to happen in the manner they were initially advertising. Grizzly's going to go down to meet in Tampa with the board and figure out where they go from here. God, what a great fucking segment. And I did leave out a very important detail about Wrestling 2 challenging the dog for the North American title. Can't believe I glossed over this. The whole thing where 2's so confident that he can beat the dog, he'll even put his mask on the line and threaten to leave Midsouth if he gets defeated. So that's another big stipulation. And like the whole thing is great because nothing is set in stone. We don't know where this is all currently going. It's now an open-ended field. Now, the presumption is Magnum's eventually going to get his title match, but you throw in the Wrestling 2 wrinkle, and now it makes the whole thing that much more interesting. Is he going to get to wrestle Dog before Magnum? And if so, what happens if Wrestling 2 defeats the Dog and wins the strap? Well, that makes things really tough because then you basically have the Mid-South Tag Team Champions being pinned against one another. Very compelling stuff, man. You know, this is the kind of storyline material that made Mid-South a must-see television product around this time. So much better than the bullshit we get today. And I'll debate anybody on that topic. If y'all think today's storytelling in wrestling is anywhere close to what Mid-South was doing back in 1984, you're a fucking moron. I'd call you delusional, but I gotta be like Wrestling 2 here. Gotta be blunt and straight to the point. So when we come back, we get the Midnight Express versus Joe Savoldi and George Weingroff. We also got pre-match comments from Jim Cornette before as he was introducing the Midnights. And this is just more classic greatness. I already knew the whole thing was going to be hilarious seeing JC interact with Reeser Bowden, mainly because we all know Reeser's reputation in Mid-South, where he just nods his head in agreement or openly laughs whenever the heels say something disparaging. And this is no different. JC's talking about how Wrestling 2 proved to the world exactly what he was saying about Magnum weeks ago. That he's a chicken and a coward. And of course you look to the side and you see Reeser standing there. He's just nodding in agreement with Jim. Like, yeah, you know, he's got a point. He also talked about how Mid-South does a good enough job pampering their top champions and making sure they're protected at all costs. Again, Reeser just standing there and fucking smiling like a dork. God. I mean, I know I say it every time. How in the fuck did Reeser last as long as he did? Or better yet, how is it that Bill Watts never talked to him about it? Just like walk up to him before the show and be like, dude, can you quit no-selling the heels and just try to act impartial? And he just looks like a mark announcer on one of those indie shows where you can tell everybody's in on the gag. So goddamn infuriating. Now, the match itself was fun. I did have to laugh hearing JR talk about Bobby Eaton being the one half of the Midnight Express with the short fuse. I'm like, beautiful Bobby Eaton. The one with the short fuse? Has Jim actually talked to Bobby for more than 3 seconds? He was the most laid-back guy in the business at this point. That was the whole running joke with Bobby in the industry. The fact that nothing would ever set him off. He was so calm, cool, and collected 100% of the time. You'd have to shove a fucking chair up his asshole for him to get pissed off. So the Midnights beat on both guys for a few minutes. And then Dennis eventually got the win with a middle rope power slam. Interesting spot here at one point where Dennis had Savoldi in a single leg Boston Crab. And when Bobby went to hit the ropes, he basically did a crossbody onto Dennis so that Dennis could fall back while still having Savoldi's leg hooked. So at the same time he was taking a back bump, he was also torquing on Savoldi's ankle. Kind of clever. You know, obviously with Bill Watts still being out, it's kind of hard to advance the feud with him and Cornette. But he's still talking smack and continuing to be a thorn in his side. From there, we had Nikolai Volkov and Steve Brinson, which Volkov won in about 90 seconds with a deadlift power slam. And then we get this tag match with Buddy Landel and Wendy Richter taking on Limp and Lanny Poffo and Princess Victoria. So, well, first and foremost, we did get an advertised girls match. They just failed to mention the part where it would be a mixed tag. Was that last week or the week before? I think it was 2 weeks ago when they said the girls are coming to Midsouth. Then last week they had to pull back on the advertisement and then said, actually, we have more important things going on, so no girls. Well, we got it this week. In moderation. I don't think I really need to explain the rules of a mixed tag. The girls wrestle the girls, guys wrestle the guys. Kind of self-explanatory. This match, you know, if anything else, this one particular match proved why Nature Boy Buddy Landel should be in any Hall of Fame class. If they would have put any other heel in this match aside from Buddy, I guarantee you it would have been the most boring mixed tag of all time. But because Buddy was in there as Wendy's partner, this match became an instant classic strictly because of his involvement. I laughed so fucking hard watching the last few minutes of this match. So the girls are in there having a sloppy back and forth. And I'm not even being openly misogynistic. I'm just calling it like it is. Whenever the girls were in there, it stunk. But again, Buddy Landel single-handedly saved it all. Wendy goes to shoot Victoria into the corner, and you see Buddy go to jut his elbow out so Victoria would accidentally run into it. And then Buddy plays it off like he had no idea what happened. That part was already funny in and of itself. But this finish had me rolling on the floor. And it was so genius. Wendy blind tags Buddy. And of course, the reason it's genius is because the referee doesn't initially see the blind tag. So when Poffo enters the ring, the referee immediately runs over to try to hold him back, not realizing that Buddy was a legal guy. So while he's not looking, Wendy shoots Victoria off the ropes. And fucking Buddy Landel, he sees Victoria coming off the ropes. And like an absolute asswipe, he levels up and just cold cocks Victoria right in the fucking face with an elbow shot. Down goes Princess Victoria like she'd been shot in the head with a pistol. And you know what, let me just dispense with all this crap that I know people are going to immediately give me. All the jack-offs that are going to say, oh my God, Tommy, why are you advocating for male-on-female violence? It's a fucking work, you dipshits. It was funny. The heels cheated and managed to outsmart the babyfaces. It's not like Buddy was in there giving Victoria DDTs and pile drivers nonstop for 15 minutes. This is the exact kind of thing you would expect a scumbag like Buddy Landel to do. Win at all costs. And God, Victoria sold it great. She just went down and that was it. Out like a light. And then Wendy Richter scored the pin. Awesome stuff, man. And you think about it too, for a total throwaway match with no story going in, God, this was way more entertaining than it had any right to be. And that led us to our TV title round for the week. Hacksaw Butch Reed and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. And as we know, these two have history going back to the run as tag champions late last year. Now, we covered the split at the Superdome after they dropped the straps to Magnum in Wrestling 2. And while they didn't necessarily put the feud on ice, they kind of got away from it for a while. It's also been a weird case where even though Hacksaw Reed was the one that facilitated the breakup, they didn't outright turn Neidhart face as a result. So this was actually kind of a rare instance of heel versus heel that worked tremendously. And they had already jump-started before they even came back from break. So these two are already going at it, throwing soup bones. And the crowd was still into it. They didn't plainly cheer for Neidhart over Reed, but it was sort of implied that Neidhart was more of the babyface in this situation than Reed, especially by the time he got to the finish. And while I can't really call it great, per se, it was a decent little Haas fight. They had a cool sequence where both guys hit their finishers on one another, but they were too close to the ropes during the pinfall attempts, so they both stayed alive even after taking one another's finish. And then fast forward to the end where they do the double down spot. Reed reaches into his tights and pulls out a gimmick to use on Jim. And when the Anvil goes to grab Reed, he gets sucker punched in the throat. And then Reed gets on top for the 3. Not really a surprising finish. Kind of figured Reed would go over here. I'm not exactly sure for how much longer Neidhart remains in Midsouth before he leaves. I kind of assumed the only reason he stuck around as long as he did was to put some kind of closure to this feud with Butch Reed. But that was basically it for the match. I didn't look at the brackets when they had it up on screen. Who does he wrestle in the next round? I guess we'd have to go back to last week. It was Dog that won last week's round, right? So I guess that would mean we're getting Dog versus Reed. That would seem to make sense. Oh man, there's plenty of story history with those two going back to last year. You know, I'll say this. We're coming up on the end of all the first rounds. The tournament itself hasn't been bad. It's just, I don't really know how I feel about stretching it out as long as they did. Like doing one round per week over a series of 7 weeks, it just seems like a lot of time to put into a tournament when you could easily cut that in half by just doing a couple rounds per week. But they had a reason for doing it the way they did, so who am I to question? We have the Rock and Roll Express in action against Tom Lentz and Jerry Gray. Just another basic enhancement to put Ricky and Robert over. Now, they made their TV debut the other week, and God, based on the reaction they got this week when they came out, you'd have thought these guys were around the territory as an established tag team for well over a year. You know, really not a whole lot to say about the action. Wasn't a very clean match because of the opponents for Ricky and Robert. Lenz and Gray had a hard time keeping up. I did enjoy hearing JR mark out for the double dropkick spot like David Crockett used to do on the Saturday TBS shows. I could almost hear his voice when JR was calling it. It's just one of those things where it's a colossal misfortune when you compare this style of wrestling back in the day to what we get now. Like all the guys that do these flashy, impressive athletic stunts. Can't even really call them moves most of the time because they barely would even qualify as that. But even for this time, when you see Ricky and Robert working together, yes, they were moving around the ring at a breakneck pace, and they were doing some flips in moderation, but nothing about it looked staged or phony. You know what I mean? It still looked like pro wrestling. And that really is the biggest problem I have with watching today's product, where, I see people try and make the argument, oh, the fast-paced stuff is so comparable to what you see back in the 80s. It's really not. I watch a Will Ospreay match and I'm sorry, I don't see pro wrestling. I see very choreographed, impressive-looking gymnastic routines. It's the same when I'm talking about a Bucks match, or you name the indie style of the month. And I even see it in WWE too. I'm not just going to exclusively call out AEW. It's the same issue over there. Who was it? Was it JD McDonough that did that asinine springboard moonsault and damn near broke his neck on the announce desk? Just for a stupid spot that didn't even lead to the finish. And I'm sorry, it's just as impressive as all that looks on camera. That's not pro wrestling, dude. That's aerial gymnastics. And how do I want to phrase this? I'll put it this way. There's something to be said about letting the business evolve. You hear that a lot with younger fans that are watching the product today. Oh, the business is different now. Times have changed. And I'll say, back in the 80s, this was definitely considered groundbreaking for the time, especially for the American market. But I still go back to that same talking point. It still looked like professional wrestling. And I just don't get that same impression when I watch today's product. Not all the time, but in most cases. I see way too much staged cinematography. Am I the only one? Is my head that deep into the sand? Or am I just spitting cold, hard truths that a lot of people don't want to admit out loud? I mean, ever since the standard for NXT became script out your matches, know what your opponent's going to do ahead of time, lay out everything beforehand, and it just doesn't create any spontaneity. Everything, again, it looks so rehearsed. And it's why it's so hard to watch the modern product today, because everybody does it. It's the same thing. I could have these conversations for hours, but we got to move on. You can all keep simmering on that for a hot minute. Meanwhile, I'll quickly go over the final standby between Crusher Darso and Mike Jackson. It won't take long. They wrestled for approximately 1 minute, and then Terry Taylor and the Rock and Roll Express came out to the commentary table. Taylor basically says that every time he and the Russians get in the ring together, They end up either getting the jump on him or they try to call him a yellow belly coward. Now, Taylor's got a receipt right now for the Russians. So capitalizing on their chance while Nikolai Volkov wasn't at ringside, they all sprint down to the ring to pin Darsow down while Taylor takes a paintbrush and basically does a coat over Darsow's stomach with red paint. Well, I should say, they claimed it was red paint. It looked more pinkish to me on film, but could have also been the lighting. And they eventually get run off by Volkov. It was a fine little angle to give the people a good laugh. Obviously, Taylor versus Darsow is going to wind up being one of the rounds in the tournament. You could clearly tell that's coming. It'll probably end up being the finals, considering how long they've been pushing this feud. But it worked. Short, sweet, and effective. And then after they replayed the Terry Taylor promo package, they go back to JR and Boyd where they're interviewing him in the Rock and Roll. And the promo material was very cut and dry. Taylor says that if Darsow wants to be a turncoat and wear the colors of the Soviet Union, it's only fitting that he wears those red colors loud and proud. Now again, back during a time where openly mocking the Russian culture on television was not only permitted, but I would dare say heavily encouraged. Cannot say the same for today's PC culture. With WWE in particular trying to get in bed with every international market they can. Hey, if that includes the Russians, they got to make their dough somehow, right? Can't wait to hear it. Royal Rumble 2032, live from Moscow. Good Lord. But you know, the Midsouth timeline just keeps ramping up with each passing week. So much great stuff on this episode. Now, granted, nothing was going to follow that contract signing. But between that, the ongoing Midnight Express versus Bill Watts feud, TV title tournament, there's a lot to sink your teeth into. And like I said, we still have not reached the peak yet. Just wait until that cake angle later this year with the Midnights and the Rock and Roll. You know, people often talk about timeless classics. Doesn't get much more timeless than that. And now we're going to turn it over to World Class. Poor Bill Mercer's fighting a cold this week. But God bless him. The man powered through it and still showed up to work to call the action. You know what we call that? Dedication. Poor guy. He was valiantly struggling to get through the show without losing his voice. But you really think about it, who the hell's going to replace him if he can't call the action? Mark Lawrence? God help us all. I think he got sick from that visit to the Tatum Hyatt complex the other week. Whatever bath salts Missy was hiding in that tub, I think it made its way into Mercer's bloodstream. Be that as it may, I'm going to try to power through this review the same way Mercer was trying to power through the commentary this week. And of course, it wouldn't be a world-class program if we didn't open with curtain jerk victory. Whoops, I meant Jack victory. You can see how I might accidentally confuse those two. And you may be wondering, who'd they serve him up to this week? Another prelim guy? Actually, no. They had bigger plans for victory this week. They had him job to Bruiser Brody, Of all weeks for Victory to demand the Dallas faithful start calling him the heartthrob of Texas, I'm like, you've been called the heartthrob of New Jersey for months. Now is the point you're trying to get over a new nickname? Talk about tone deaf. So yeah, Bruiser basically beat the shit out of him for several minutes and then eventually won with a delayed pile driver. There was a very fleeting moment in this match where he no-sold a bunch of chops and clubbing blows to the chest from Victory. That was about all the offense he got in. So this was in fact a very traditional use of the term squash. Just kind of furthering along my theory about the treatment of Jack Victory in World Class here in 1986. What is looking like a concerted effort by the company to run this guy out of the territory as quickly as possible. And he does end up going to the Carolinas very soon. So I guess they wound up getting what they wanted. Heartthrob of Texas. Yeah, how about no? Anyway, let's talk about the real substance of this week's program. So at the beginning, Mercer plugged, I guess, what you would call a State of the Union address regarding a major announcement involving World Class's future operations. And before he actually pitched at the press conference with Ken Mantell, he did specifically name the organization World Class Wrestling Association. And we have been talking for a while now, this being the period where, after the company had withdrawn from the National Wrestling Alliance agreement, and they became its own independent regional promotion, Fritz had gone through a lot of rebranding changes. Now, this wasn't a company rebrand announcement, but it kind of fell in the category of the company making a drastic change regarding the state of one of their top belts. And as you may know, if you've been following the reviews, World Class has traditionally recognized the American Heavyweight title as the top belt. However, the American Heavyweight belt will now be officially recognized as the World Heavyweight belt, which means Rude will now be considered the current World Heavyweight champion. Now, they didn't outright mention a new belt or a new belt design. They're just changing the name, essentially. And by that same token, they're also initiating a new rule when it comes to title defenses. The champion is not permitted to get himself intentionally counted out or disqualified in order to retain the belt on a technicality. And the reason for this change? Well, Ken didn't really explain why. Apparently, fans had been sending in letters expressing their discontent for the way the heel champions have been able to keep the titles even though they lose the match in a countout or DQ. So, traditionally, the way wrestling's always been done. But they're trying to be different. And now they're instituting a rule where the belt can change hands via pinfall, submission, DQ, or countout. That way there are no excuses. And then, of course, you had all the fake press in the audience asking these super phony softball questions.
Mr. Mantell, is World Class really going to institute this new rule?
Yes, he just fucking said that, you dipshit. Did he stutter? Where's my Josh Peck clip when I need it? Get your butt out of your ears. Morons. I was actually expecting this press conference to be something a little more insider scoop. I don't specifically remember the rationale for the company changing belt names, My presumption is it had something to do with the NWA withdrawal. Technically, the NWA World Heavyweight title was still considered the top belt in the area, even though we didn't see Flair defend the championship there all too often. I mean, the American Heavyweight title was basically their top regional belt, but it was still considered a step down from the World Heavyweight title. So I guess they wanted to have an actual top world champion. But maybe I'm wrong. I know later this year they actually create a brand new world title design. I think for one of the stadium shows. But for the time being, Rude is still considered the current top champion, so really not a whole lot different. At least for the time being. Then we came back for Rick Rude versus Jerry Allen. Obviously non-title, because Lord knows we wouldn't want to jeopardize Rick Rude's title reign here against Jerry Allen. He was giving Rude a rough time in the first several minutes of this match. But then Rude eventually cut him off and had a very easy time working him over. I like the one point where Percy turned to the crowd and went, "Now that is what you call a world champion." He pauses, and then he continues with, "That's the champion of the whole world." Thanks, Percy. Glad we clarified that. What was it? Several years ago, Chris Daniels and Frankie Kazarian called themselves the World Tag Team Champions of the World. Oh, God. They got it from Percy. Admittedly so, I'm not entirely sure why Rick Rude needed 8 minutes to beat Jerry fucking Allen of all people. But they didn't lose the crowd. Shockingly enough. Allen got a minute of hope spots during the small comeback at the end. And then Rude shut him down and hit the Rude Awakening DDT for the pin. Very anticlimactic. Percy just screamed, "Wake him up, Ricky! Wake him up! Rude Awakening!" And then Rude just hit the DDT and won. Still trying to navigate a path of where exactly they're going with Rude as the top champion. I think the end game is to do him and Chris Adams at the stadium show in May, right? Is that where Adams wins the belt? Or is that later in 86? Can't be too far off because I know Rude's about to go to Crockett pretty soon. But I'm so scatterbrained when it comes to this period of world-class history. I remember little nuggets of detail here and there, but in terms of the week-to-week booking, I'm very out to lunch. So before we talk about the main event, as we welcome the Fantastics back to the Dallas area, can I just say, God bless Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton. These guys were absolutely wonderful talents. One of my favorite tag teams of all time. Have they ever done a promo where they've actually said anything of remote substance? Beyond any kind of generic, we're glad to be back in front of all these good people and hopefully we walk out with the win tonight kind of promos. It's amazing to me because the people go batshit for these guys. They literally didn't say shit in this promo. Bobby's like, "Glad to be here with all the nice fans. Looking forward to wrestling tonight. What about you, Tommy?" Then Tommy goes, "Yeah, it's great to be back, Bill, and we're looking forward to the opportunity." Yeah. Fuck yeah, dude. Love these guys. God, their promos are so bland and vanilla. But they are cool dudes. I always love when they just pause and throw up the thumbs up to the camera. And they do the little smile afterwards. And you're just like, these guys are so awesome. Wouldn't you just love to sit down and have a drink with them? I know poor Tommy's no longer with us. But Bobby Fulton, I kid you not, dude, I would totally buy that guy a drink and just shoot the shit for a few hours about wrestling talk. That'd be one of the greatest days of my life. All right. So the main event of the Fantastics taking on the Grappler and John Tatum. And remember the stipulation. Missy will not permit John to lose another match in World Class. She is going to make sure he wins every single one of his matches. Or else. Ultimatums. Translation, her foot, his ass. And this match ended up being a whole lot of fun. Probably more entertaining than it had any right to be. This double team sequence in the first several minutes, just classic Fantastics, man. First, they do a double shoot-off to try and ram the Fantastics into each other. But then Bobby and Fulton basically do a baseball slide to plant their feet against each other. And then they spring back and kick the heels in the face. So they do a role reversal on that spot a minute later. Only when the heels go to try to kick the Fantastics, they just get shit-canned and double wishboned. And like all the fans, of course, pop for it and give it a standing ovation. It's phenomenal stuff. Even if it defies all the logic of tag team rules because Rick Hazard just stands there and doesn't try to initiate a 5 count. But they even got the fans to chant along in the count out when the heels are stalling on the floor. I've never heard the Dallas fans count along with that level of energy. So the Fantastics are just having their way with these guys. Tatum and Grappler can't get anything going offensively. Missy's out on the floor ripping her hair out and having a mental breakdown over the incompetence of her team. It really is an astonishing match because even when the heels would get momentary flashes of heat, Bobby and Tommy would somehow regain the advantage shortly thereafter. So you really didn't have a babyface in peril for Bobby or Tommy at any point in this match. Which, of course, led you to believe the heels probably weren't going to do a job because of the fact that they gave the babyfaces so much in this match. You had to figure the heels would at least walk away with getting some of their heat back. Now, they did manage to isolate Bobby in the last few minutes before he got the hot tag to Tommy for the comeback sequence. There was a very clunky double atomic drop sequence where the heels kind of grazed one another, but not really. And then chaos ensued with all 4 guys. There was a moment off camera where I believe they dumped Tommy Rogers over the top rope for the automatic disqualification. And then they held Bobby Fulton back so Missy could come in and slap him in the face a few times. So in the end, yeah, the babyfaces technically won. But the heels got to walk away unscathed. Relatively. And I guess Missy and John are still okay. I mean, they lost the match, but he didn't get pinned. And that's the most important part. Fun main event. And that's what it's all about here on the channel, right? Fun. Make sure we scream it from the rooftop so everybody knows it. Oh, out of the respect for the neighbors, I'm not going to do that. Even though most of them never return the favor. But in any case, that is going to wrap up this Friday show here. Thanks everybody for stopping back to check out the 5 Starr Wrestling Report. And we will be back on Monday for 2 reviews. We'll have Retro Raw, And then we'll also have the WWE Elimination Chamber. Oh boy. There's been a lot of speculation about how this WrestleMania pay-per-view is going to play out. Pay-per-view premium live special. I'm never going to get in the habit of calling it a PLE. It's wired into my brain to forever call it a pay-per-view. So, we have 4 matches, 2 chamber matches, a tag team match with girls that I'm not really all that interested in, and then an unsanctioned match with Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. Oh boy. There's a fresh matchup. Haven't seen that a million times before. I'm not going to do a card preview or anything, but I mean, obviously the match that I'm most looking forward to is probably the men's chamber, because it really is one of those cases where they could go with a couple different options and it would make logical sense, because obviously the winner is going to challenge Cody. I think they've already set Gunther and Jey Uso in stone for Mania. But because of what they did last week on SmackDown with The Rock, him coming back and I guess you could say extending the olive branch to Cody, telling him to join the dark side, to become his corporate champion or whatever the story is going to be. There's a couple different ways they could go with that, and it would make sense. They could hypothetically turn Cody heel and have him retain the title in Mania. You could also do something with one of the guys in this chamber match where if for whatever reason they don't turn Cody, it could always be a Punk or a McIntyre. I don't really see it being a John Cena. I mean, it's wishful thinking on everybody's part. Oh, we'll finally get a John Cena heel turn. We're about 15 years past that point, people. Actually, to tell you the truth, and I still maintain this opinion all these years later, if they were going to turn Cena heel, the prime time to do it would have been after he lost to The Rock, the first match. But they didn't do it. So, lost cause, missed opportunity. But Punk and McIntyre, I could see that actually working out. Rollins, I don't really see it. Logan Paul's not going to win the match anyway. Damian Priest is kind of a wild card, I guess. Yeah, they could, but again, I don't think that people are really clamoring for a Damian Priest push. The poor guy, he worked his ass off as the world champion, but the title reign just didn't click. Didn't have a lot of very good opponents. Didn't really seem to resonate with everybody. So, I think the ship may have sailed on that experiment. But we'll see. There's a lot of speculation going on for how this Mania card is going to play out, and playing field got a whole lot more interesting. So I'll give them credit. They're getting people talking. And that's what they need right now. They need some buzz. So we'll see. But we'll catch you guys on Monday, and hopefully with a decent amount of material to cover. Take care. Peace out.